Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today, we are going to be talking about the Charlotte Hornets, a team that uh, honestly has not been doing very well for themselves pretty recently, and I guess in general as well. So we're just gonna sort of hop right into it because there's a lot to sort of go over at this point. If you're unfamiliar, the Charlotte Hornets have not had a whole lot of success in recent times. Obviously, every team in the NBA has its ups and downs, has its periods where they're very good and very bad, but the Hornets' period of being bad has gone on for quite some time now. They've had just 4 winning seasons in the last 20 years. They've made just 3 playoff appearances in those last 20 years, and they haven't won a playoff game itself since 2002. If I've got my stats correct there. So it's been a while since the Hornets have really seen any measure of success, let alone sort of sustained success in the NBA. They've been pretty bad for a while. However, they appeared to be on the road to rebuilding, at least having something that would give them hope. Guys like LaMelo Ball, Terry Rozier, PJ Washington, Miles Bridges issues and suspension and whatnot. Guys like that generated some hope, right, for the rebuild, that they had sort of young or talented guys who maybe weren't ready to go right this second, but could develop into a more competitive team, which is normally how a rebuilding team rebuilds. There's nothing wrong with that. However, there are some ongoing issues for the Hornets that have kind of put the timeline of their rebuild in jeopardy, on top of just making the Hornets kind of look a little disorganized. Maybe not the best run team in the modern NBA. So we'll talk about the two issues sort of maybe off the court here: Kai Jones and Miles Bridges. We'll try and keep it brief because I'm sure most people already kind of know what's up. But for Kai Jones, young prospect, not getting a lot of minutes, but someone they were hoping to develop, was acting incredibly strange. I think erratic was the term used pretty heavily on his social media. The Hornets eventually kind of got sick of it. They announced that Kai Jones would be away from the team at the start of training camp, excuse me. Jones requested that he be traded, and the Hornets waived him instead. Now, Kai Jones is maybe not an integral part of the Hornets, right? He's played just 2 seasons in the NBA so far. He's not exactly an elite prospect at this stage. He played 67 games across those 2 seasons for the Hornets, averaged about 9 minutes per game, less than 3 points, a couple of rebounds per game. Shooting numbers were okay at 56.7%, but that's only because he wasn't really taking too many shots. So it's not like Kai Jones was a guy who was going to imminently start for the Hornets, but he was still a prospect that they were looking at, who they basically let go because his behavior was too much for them to justify keeping around. And that leads us into the next point, that being Miles Bridges. So Bridges missed a whole season last year. He was dealing with issues related to domestic violence charges, and now, this close to the start of the next season, he may be in some trouble again. There was an arrest warrant issued for him, I think, back in January. The situation was kind of weird because they couldn't serve him a criminal summons for a while, so that has only just now sort of caught up to him. Not a criminal lawyer, but he might be in some trouble once again. His status is not clear. Even if he is good to go, he's still suspended for the first 10 games of the season, I believe. So Bridges' status is uncertain at this point. So you take a look at the Hornets, and, before the season's even started, 2 of their guys are either off the team or potentially might have availability issues due to behavioral problems. And that's not even looking at their normal normal, just sort of transactional roster issues, right? Free agency did kind of hit them hard, which is very unfortunate for a team in the Hornets position. They were 27-55 last season. They were well and truly one of the worst teams in the league. Not the worst overall, but definitely on the bottom end. But they really made no major moves during the offseason to try and bring in more talent. In fact, they ended up losing quite a few more players. In particular, the duo of Kelly Oubre Jr. and Mason Plumlee both ended up leaving in free agency. So those two guys by themselves really takes a lot off the table here for the Hornets. If we look at their combined stats for the previous season, Oubre and Plumlee combined to average 32.5 points, 14.9 rebounds, 4.8 assists, 2 steals, and 1 block per game. So, they weren't just sort of guys off the bench. These were two, for the most part, sort of starting caliber players that you lost. And that's not the only sort of attrition, let's say, to the roster. Guys like Jalen McDaniels left, Dennis Smith Jr. went elsewhere, Svi Mikhailuk is also gone, and yeah, I know those names that I just mentioned are maybe not as well known as Oubre and Plumlee, but if you take all that together, Oubre, Plumlee, McDaniels, Smith Jr., Mikhailuk, they lost 3 bench players and 2 starting caliber players, but all 5 of those guys averaged at least 20 minutes per game for the Hornets last season. So regardless of how good you think some of those players are that I mentioned, the fact of the matter was that they were significant parts of the Hornets rotations just by pure minutes played. So that's 5 guys, all of whom averaged 20 minutes per game, who are now gone. You have 1 more player in Bridges who is suspended for the first 10 games of the season and may be facing further legal and or disciplinary complications, both from the law and from the Hornets as an organization in the future. So 6 guys in total from last year's roster are either not here or may not be available. And if you look at what the Hornets brought in to try and replace those guys in those minutes, it really isn't quite enough. They got Brandon Miller, obviously. He's looking incredibly good as a prospect, so they are excited about him. But other than that, they brought in another rookie, Nick Smith Jr., with their other pick, who obviously has not been receiving as much attention as Brandon Miller because he was picked significantly further back in the draft. But both Miller and Smith Jr. are rookies, so they've got an acclimation period to the NBA game. And the only other significant move the Hornets made was re-signing PJ Washington, which is great. It's good that they keep Washington, but that's not really bringing in reinforcements. That's just keeping a guy who they already had. So how are they going to replace those players? Not just their sort of minutes played, not just their place in the rotation, but their potential production. As I mentioned, Oubre Jr. and Plumlee together combined for 33 points per game. Is Brandon Miller going to score you 33 points a game as a rookie? That would be incredible. That would be a very clear and easy Rookie of the Year award for him, but yeah, don't really think that that's going to happen. So the Hornets have that issue, right? So if we take a step back and we look at this, a lot of people might say, well, what's the problem? The Hornets are bad. The Hornets have been bad. The Hornets will continue to be bad in this scenario. And the wheel keeps turning, so to speak, right? The team can simply continue to rebuild. They're in a rebuilding phase. Why not just extend it out a little bit? And there's nothing wrong with that logic at first glance, except for the fact that you start to look at the timing for the Hornets in terms of their players, their futures, and their contracts. And that's where you see the window not closing. That seems a little too harsh, but getting narrower for sure. That's basically the same as closing. I realize that now, but it's too late. But the window is shrinking. But the Hornets are going to have to navigate this, right? If you take a look at what's going on with their roster, At the end of this current season, Gordon Hayward's going to be a free agent. Miles Bridges, regardless of whether he plays or not, only has this one final year on his contract. So both of those players will become free agents at the end of the season. This is the final year before LaMelo Ball's massive contract extension kicks in. Just to sort of put that in perspective, this year, the 23-24 season, he's making about $10.9 million. Starting next season, he's going to make $35.5 million, and I believe that is going up over the years in terms of his contract. So the good news is you have LaMelo locked into a long-term contract. The bad news is some of the weapons around him are becoming free agents, and the overall cost of your lineup is going to increase because you don't have LaMelo on that cheap deal. Well, cheap-ish deal anymore, right? $11 million for his production was relatively cheap. So how are you going to manage that? The idea of the rebuild for the Hornets was that you would have a combination of your young guys and some veteran players, guys like, Terry Rozier and the now gone Mason Plumlee, and you would put them together, and the development of your young players would coincide with hopefully still getting production out of your more experienced players, and you would have a competitive team that had talent, experience, but also had manageable contracts. That's sort of the ideal rebuild scenario, and the Hornets have sort of passed that mark now, right? Maybe they don't re-sign Hayward. That's going to save him, $30 million, but that money will be funneled into LaMelo's contract. You're still paying Rozier. Brandon Miller's contract is worth like 10 plus million because of the position he was drafted in. So the Hornets are going to be potentially still just as bad as they were last season, potentially even worse. In terms of their money, however, they might be paying comparable amounts in terms of overall salary to what they had before, and not really seeing significant improvement there. So that's the threat here with the timing. It eats away a little bit of the Hornets' financial flexibility without providing the sort of jump in results that they might have been hoping for. So it's not a great situation for the Hornets. But is it still possible for the Hornets to turn this around? Of course, it's absolutely possible. The team that they currently have could work out. The players could have taken a massive step forward in the offseason, and Brandon Miller might, again, just go out and play sort of rookie of the year caliber stuff and really help elevate that team. But that feels like it's going to be the exception rather than the expectation here for the Hornets. It feels as though that sweet spot for them completing this rebuild quickly and cheaply is starting to fade, and now they're going to have to work even harder than they already would have to get back into a relatively competitive position. So it's a bit unfortunate because a lot of these issues for the Hornets are kind of self-inflicted, right? Guys like Bridges and Kai Jones have presented behavioral issues, character flaws, let's say, that were not entirely unavoidable if you're Charlotte. So, like I said, some of the issues are self-inflicted, some are a little out of their control as well, but when both of those things come together, you end up with a Hornets team that has made, 3 playoff appearances in 20 years. So, maybe this is the year that they turn it around, but I don't really expect that to be the case. I think the Hornets are going to struggle once again, and that makes me kind of sad because you don't want to see a team struggle for that long, that consistently. We've seen it, well, recently I was going to say with the Kings, although they have finally managed to get themselves going and make at least one playoff appearance, but it really is rough when a team sits at the bottom for, 1 or 2 decades. So here's hoping that the Hornets can turn it around, but they've got a lot of ground to cover. But let me know what you think about the Hornets, about any of the problems here. Kai Jones, Miles Bridges, maybe stay away from the legal side of things, but do you think Bridges has a future with the team? Do you think Brandon Miller is going to be able to contribute significantly enough to matter for the Hornets? And how do they replace those 5 or 6 guys who played significant minutes for them and are now gone? Is it just next man up? Do you think the Hornets need to maybe make a trade or bring someone in? Or do they just sort of do nothing and roll the dice and hope for the best? I unfortunately think that that might be the most likely scenario, even though it's the one least likely to actually help them. But it is what it is. We'll see how the Hornets fare this season, but we haven't even actually started playing real games yet, and I am already very concerned for them. But again, feel free to let me know what you think. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.